A lot of times you find yourself going, oh my gosh, I keep doing this. Like, why in the world am I stuck in this pattern? I know better. I continue to do this. Why? So instead of spinning out like that, the Enneagram gives you this basis to land on, like, which of these five patterns of mine in my core type might I be trying to reach? And then there's a levels of development within it that helps you to understand what's healthy, average, and unhealthy for your type.
My guest today is Chelsie Engle of Elite Enneagram Coaching. She's a certified Enneagram coach who helps clients discover why they feel stuck, how to release these core struggles, and live more present and connected so they can be the best versions of themselves. Chelsie became inspired by the Enneagram because of how it helped herself be a better educator, speaker, wife, and mom. And she now enjoys sharing this valuable tool with individuals around the world.
What I love about the Enneagram, and I know we'll talk about this, but what I love about the Enneagram is it expands your perspectives and helps you to understand as true and real as your type is to you, so is the other person's type to them. And it removes that like ego piece of like, I'm right, you're wrong. And so it can just allow for that more open communication. So that's something I think can be really powerful for people. And even if they don't know their type yet, leave the podcast going, okay, wait, like that's really cool to kind of expand their understanding of that.
That actually sounds like a perfect place to start. So
Okay,
maybe you could just expand into sort of the 30,000-foot view for listeners who don't know anything about this.
sure.
What is it basically, and maybe how can they be thinking about how it would apply to them as whether they be parents, spouses, employers, employees, whatever?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So the Enneagram is a personality framework that helps us to understand why we do what we do. So there are nine core types, and each has their unique motivation, fear, and coping strategies. So this is not about behavior. This is what sets it apart from other personality typing systems, which really focus on what we're doing. This is digging into the unconscious drivers behind your patterns. So when we're looking at the nine types, we're really describing what are their patterns of behavior that develop from this unconscious motivation. And a lot of times when we think about motivations, we think about something that we want to do. Well, that is what a motivation is, but each of the nine types kind of has like why we're doing what we're doing. Okay, so a lot of times you find yourself going, oh my gosh, I keep doing this. Like, why in the world am I stuck in this pattern? I know better. I continue to do this. Why? So instead of spinning out like that, the Enneagram gives you this basis to land on, like, which of these five patterns of mine in my core type might I be trying to reach? And then there's a levels of development within it that helps you to understand what's healthy, average, and unhealthy for your type. And from there, you can say, I know this is the healthy way this behavior or this motivation can show up for me. And this is the average and unhealthy way. And I can kind of see myself doing that. So, how can I shift that again back into the healthy side of things? So, rather than spinning out in a shame spiral, it helps you to kind of find your groundedness and lean towards back into those more grounded and centered selves.
So as an Enneagram coach and a
Mhm.
specialist, what kinds of clients come to you? Who is coming to you? How are they finding out about this, and what are they wanting to work on or resolve?
I run the gamut. So I kind of find people who, either have lost themselves due to addiction. So they only know who they are if they're drinking, for example. Or a mother who has lost who she is in raising her kids. Or I feel like I don't get the access to men as often. I don't understand why, but I think it's a little bit of that. You have to be quite vulnerable to understand your Enneagram type. So a lot of times it's couples where the wife has worked with me and she sees how beneficial it has been for her to understand her type. And so she brings her husband in. And so I'll do couples sessions in that way, help them to really understand where each one is coming from as well. I work with corporate groups as well, doing team dynamics. So it kind of runs the gamut. It's just really people who want to understand themselves, have a little bit more self-awareness and development. I personally like to work with people who are really curious about themselves and are just looking for that, like, really clear path. Like, there's so many ways and avenues, and how do I do this? And with the Enneagram, it's literally a path to your highest self. And I just kind of walk alongside you and support you with the materials, and you get to be that person who's like self-reflecting and hearing back. And like with anything, everybody's always like, how do you know when you become your type? Okay, like that's a big question. And with that, it's like, well, with anything in psychology, it's nature versus nurture. So I can't go to a infant and say, what are your core motivations and desires? And they're not going to be able to go into their subconscious and come out with it. But any of us who have kids or we're teachers or we interact with children at all know that when they are born with a very distinct personality and it just kind of develops from there. And each of us do have a unique environment that we grow up in. And so it mixes with those motivations and those fears. And that is what then kind of melds together to make your individual self. So likely we're born or type, no way to prove that, but then it kind of develops through life. So I find that most of the time, once people are in their early 30s, they're kind of trying to figure themselves out. Like, who am I really now that I've left my parents and I don't know anymore really who I am. And so this kind of gives them a place to land and learn more about themselves.
So this is really a tool for individuals who are interested in self-development. And as you just said, it's an established, structured way to walk that journey because as you just said, there's so many options out there to self-improvement. It's hard to know what to choose or what to do first or how they all work together. So this is one avenue that is very detailed, it's established, and you can walk your clients through that process with them. So when they reach out to you, maybe just start with what does this process look like when you start working with a client? Do you start, coaching them right away? Do you direct them towards the test? How does that work?
So when I start working with a client, the first step is to ensure that they've been typed correctly. So if they believe that they know their type, for example, then I'll help them to make sure that that's their type. But a lot of people come to me and they're not even really sure what their type is. A lot of people hear about Enneagram tests and they say like, I took the test, so I did the Enneagram. And I like to really like put up my hands and a big X on that and say the Enneagram is not a test. It is an entire system of personality. And so it's been kind of reduced down to a test in order to quickly find your type. That's impossible. Finding your type is a very deep seated thing within yourself because this has to do with your subconscious fears and desires. And what's in front of your subconscious fears and desires is all of this ego, all of these thought processes and patterns that we've put in place, right? So for me as a certified Enneagram coach, I have created my own, you can call it a test, but it's basically open-ended questions where people answer those and then they rate themselves on each of the 9 types. I go into detail in video and tell them about each of the 9 types, and they kind of rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10, like this is how true this is to me, like this is really, really me, or this is only kind of me. Because we can see ourselves in all the 9 types. Although one core type is and always will be your type, there are ways in which you are utilizing the other types or they're in a similar structure as you look through the sequences of the Enneagram. And so, you will find yourself in multiple types, but I use that information and analyze that. And then we work together in what I call a typing session after you've completed that. And I've looked at that and analyzed it. And it's really open-ended and it really kind of goes into the whatever direction the client is needing. But I help them to kind of discover, like, tell me what is the best feeling in the world for you and why. And you can just start with that. What is the best feeling in the world for you and why? And if you want to answer that, I might be able to type you right here. I can put you on the spot.
I think the best feeling for me is being feeling really enthusiastic
Mm,
about whatever I'm doing or whatever I'm studying or whatever, just feeling enthusiastic, the energy that comes with that, the excitement that's, you probably know Joseph Campbell, he says, follow your bliss. And I think about like
mhm,
following my enthusiasm. That really gets me excited. So there you
mhm.
go.
Okay. And then conversely, what is some of the worst or what kind of drives you nuts or what can't you stand or what do you try to stay away from and why?
Probably anything maintenance work, doing the same thing over and over again, feeling stagnant.
Okay, so likely just based upon those first very questions, I would say you would look into the Enneagram 7, which the nickname for the Enneagram 7, every teacher and place has their own nickname to help because when you first enter the system, you hear type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't know what that means, right? It's on purpose that you don't know what that means because it causes you to do what? Get curious. and start looking into it. What is this? What's going on? And people are like, well, I don't want to be called a number. You don't have to be called a number. It's like once you unfold it and look into it, you realize all what's there behind it. So it's instead of putting you in a box and calling you a number, it's actually showing you the box you've been in and helping you to discover all what's inside of the box, and what's already there. Likely you're an Enneagram 7, which is the enthusiastic optimist, and your desires include being satisfied and fulfilled and content. Now, these desires for you are going to feel somewhat out of reach. Like you can't quite feel satisfaction. You keep searching for it. You keep desiring it. You keep looking for it. Ooh, this feels good. Let me go there. Not satisfied. Ooh, this looks good. Let me go there. Not satisfied. Then the fears that come with that are being bored, being stuck in emotional pain, and just that general dissatisfaction and mostly that emotional pain piece. So like sitting with your feelings, sitting with uncomfortable situations, engaging in comfortable situations, feel of feeling trapped or limited, all of those things. So I see you nodding. Is this kind of sounding like you?
It is. And what popped into my mind is for somebody who presents with this type, who's not familiar with the Enneagram, or they just start working with you, have they had other labels, either self-imposed or diagnosed? Do you see a lot of overlap with, kind of previous assessment that lines up with these Enneagram types? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I'm not well versed in all of the other personality systems. I've always been obsessed with learning about them. So I've taken all the different tests, the MBTIs, the Clifton Strengths, like all of the different pieces that, people know of that are the main ones. You can cross them over, and what I have found is like the Enneagram is so expansive that almost any of the other systems, you can find a section of the Enneagram that coincides with it that helps you to go like, oh, like like your horoscopes or something like that. You could figure that out within your Enneagram and kind of collect them together. And so people who like to like speak on their horoscopes likely will connect with one of their types and say, oh, that's just like this in this part, or that's just like this in this part. But um, coming into the system, I think it just is like, some of the types you can take a test that takes 5 minutes. It's going to spit you out a type and it's going to be your type. Okay. But some of the types are very, very, very nuanced and they look a lot like each other. And some people, like their self-awareness isn't quite there yet to even be able to answer the questions. And when given two options, their ego is going to pop up and they're going to choose the one they want to be rather than the one they are. So that's where doing a typing session with me, if you and I were doing that, I would then go into some more information for you and develop it and say, like, here's the childhood experience of the Enneagram 7 and some of the pieces behind that, and open up that for you to kind of reflect back to me, and connect with and give examples of. So as you go through the session, you're learning more about the type and yourself and how you fit into it. So by the end of the session, you feel really solid about it. And also then, okay, so what do I do with this, right? Like, how do I use this in everyday life?
Okay, I see what you mean now about the difference between a test and really a process of discovery, that it would be helpful to be coached through. Because as you just pointed out, you might be inclined to answer certain ways and you need somebody to sort of support you and get you to dive a little bit deeper. As much as I'd love to pursue my type, of course, for our listeners, do you want to just go through some of the different types, or what's
Absolutely.
the next?
I think most people want to kind of hear them so that they can go, oh, that sounds like me, or that sounds like my friend, or my aunt, or my uncle, or whoever. And I will say, as a coach, I always say to people, it's totally okay. And it's very natural and human to say, I think that might be my type. I think that might be someone else's type. But if you're brand new to the system, kind of a big no-no is going to someone being like, I think you're this type because, and then pointing out all the like icky things about the type. You're going to turn someone off right away. So you can use it for yourself all you want to try to understand that person. But again, because these are subconscious desires and motivations, unless you're going to have this open-ended conversation with them and go deep with it, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to type someone really, really quickly with this. And so after years and hundreds of people that I've typed, probably 1,000 by this point, understanding communication styles and looking at all the patterns in between things, I can do it quickly, but that's because I'm doing all my cute calculations in my brain. So I'll go over the 9 types, but just keep that in mind while you're hearing about it. The type 1 is sometimes called the reformer, or sometimes called a perfectionist. most ones don't love that nickname. And so a lot of times the Enneagram is going to point out things about you that like are your icks about yourself. It could be blind spots or parts of yourself that you don't love. And so that can also turn people off. But what I say is if you're not willing to dig into those pieces of yourself and really look at those and hold a mirror to them, then you're not having self-compassion. And self-compassion is the number one way for us to like grow into who we truly are in our highest selves. So the Enneagram 1 is very principled, responsible, and they're driven by a need to be good and do what's right. They strive to be right and have integrity and to do the right thing. There's each of these have a very stereotypical way in which they show up, but just know that there's so much behind that as well. Type 2, which is my core type, I am a supportive helper. We're very caring and generous, and we're very motivated by the desire to be loved, wanted, and sometimes needed. And so we're going to show up and be the person who's bubbly and caring and probably doing too much for people. So we can overstep ourselves a little bit in that, just looking for that love, attention, and affirmation that we need. The Enneagram
Can I
3,
ask you a question
yes,
right there, actually?
please.
Since that's your type,
Yeah.
and I'm imagining whether a listener is a clinician or a parent, there are probably a lot of people that identify with that. Can you just talk quickly about what somebody who's actualized and actualized to
Mhm.
looks like versus somebody who is more in the, I guess, the shadow self or
Yeah.
the fear-based mindset?
Absolutely. So in the Enneagram, there's the 9 levels of development that were created by Riso and Hudson from the Enneagram Institute. So the Enneagram Institute is a fantastic website to go to. Great materials there, and they have those 9 levels of psychological development for each of the types. So there's 3 levels in healthy, 3 levels in average, and 3 levels in unhealthy. So a very unhealthy Enneagram 3 psychologically, or Enneagram 2 psychologically, is going to be kind of getting love at all costs. They're going to be completely losing themselves in this, but they're going to be a martyr. They're going to be, almost sick because they have no time for themselves. They're constantly giving, and then they're going to be very angry that no one else cares as much as they do. No one else is giving to them as much as they are giving. And that anger goes to that each of the Enneagram types have like a stress arrow and a growth arrow. The stress arrow for us is the 8, which is the challenger, and we're very self-righteously angry. They can completely break down and be physically ill because we repress our own emotions in order to take care of others. And so we don't take care of ourselves because having needs feels too needy. And it just, we have the need to suppress that because we want others to need us. And if we have needs, that kind of is at odds with each other. So uh, for when I first learned about the Enneagram, I was a teacher. I was extremely, like, I was sick all the time. I never slept. I didn't take care of myself. I didn't exercise. I didn't have time for anybody else. I definitely couldn't do anything for myself. It had to be for everyone else at all times so that I could get that affirmation back. In my self-development, I had to learn what are my needs? What do I want? What do I want? What does that look like to ask for those needs to be met? How do I start actually taking care of myself? And my growth path is to the Enneagram 4, which is the individualist, and to start focusing on that same compassion and care that I give to others, to give that to myself. So self-actualized looks like someone who no longer gives to get, no longer is showing up and helping. It's called the highest level of development is called the disinterested altruist. And the disinterested altruist is still always going to be coming from a place where they want to help and support, but they're completely disinterested in the outcome. So I'm not helping to get anything, even to get them to a better place. I'm simply helping from my highest self because I desire to give of myself to others, but I never give too much of myself so that I lose my center.
That is so interesting. So you're detaching from the outcomes, focusing on the caretaking, applying it to yourself and others, but you're not weighing yourself down with other people's what they do with that or
Mhm.
what responsibility they take over their actions. It sounds like a much healthier kind of a boundary that you're setting
Yeah,
with
we
that
learn
approach.
where our energy is flowing because where your attention goes, your energy goes. And so when we're constantly giving our attention to others in our relationships, we lose all of our energy. So understanding where my head, heart, and body energy was going and saving it for myself and saying no and setting boundaries and then being okay with that. Like understanding that might mean they don't want me to help then in the future. Really, really difficult stuff for us because that's detaching from that need to be wanted and needed. But until you fully love yourself, until you fully love the needs you have, you cannot receive that from someone else. So they could appreciate me, they could love on me and all those things, but because I'm not doing that for myself, I myself am not actually taking it. So now that I'm in a more balanced space, when people love on me, I accept that love and I love myself, so I don't actually need them to tell me that, if that makes sense.
That's wonderful. And sorry for interrupting you there. I just
Okay.
wanted to highlight that since that's your type. So that really, I think
No,
that
I
will
love it.
track with a lot of people who are listening.
Yeah, I think so too. And we twos are very interested in the Enneagram because we want to know how to love on each other types. And we're likely going to learn about all the other types besides ours first because that causes us to look at ourselves. And so it's a very beneficial tool for us twos. Yeah. Well,
Okay.
for
So
all
that's
the
a one
types.
and two. So do you
Yes.
want to go on to number three then?
Number three is called the successful achiever. They're extremely ambitious, adaptable, sometimes called chameleonic, and they're focused on success and being seen as valuable. And that being seen as valuable is very dependent on their environment growing up. So if valuable was money, then they're going to try to make money. If valuable was nurturing, caring, supportive, then that's what valuable is going to be. So it definitely changes depending on someone's environment. So that's the three. The Enneagram 4 is the individualist, and they're very, very deep, expressive, and they're very centered on their authenticity and their identity. So they're trying to show up as their most authentic self and find significance in this world. They often feel misunderstood, like nobody can understand them, but they also don't want to like they feel like if you understand them, they lose their identity. So it's like this need to feel individual and to have significance. This stems from their disconnection from both their parental figures and their ego self. So, not that they don't have a relationship with both parental figures, but that they always felt disconnected from the beginning. And so they feel like outsiders in this world. Um, and then the type 5 is the investigator. They're very curious, cerebral, and they seek knowledge and independence. So they desire to be have enough knowledge to sustain life. And they are very stingy with this knowledge. So they don't give it out much and they're very to themselves. They sit on the outside and observe and watch what's going on. And they only engage when they find it kind of something interesting, immediate, or when they feel like they have enough to say about it. Um, so that's the investigator. The type 6 is called the loyalist. They're extremely responsible, security focused, and driven by the need for safety and support. A 6 can look like a 1, a 2, and an 8. A lot of people who are sixes mistype as all these other types because they are dependent stance type. They are ambivalent, like up and down, black and white, yes and no. They have this inner um, this table in their head with all these little versions of themselves. And it's like, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, what about this? Well, what about that? And they're constantly trying to figure out like what's the worst case scenario? What could happen so that if they understand that worst fear, they can prepare for it. They have a hard time making decisions. And then when they are actually in, like a big thing happens, the worst fear happens, they're calm and cool because they've made the plan for this. But making a decision such as like what paint color to use, they're going to be driving themselves crazy about it. And they struggle a lot with anxiety. And then Enneagram 7, which is the one we think you might be, is fun-loving, spontaneous, and motivated by a need to avoid pain, mostly emotional pain, and to keep life exciting. So they're just looking for the next thing that's going to fulfill them. And they're on the outside, they're going to mostly look enthusiastic to people and look positive and bubbly, but that's also because they don't want to burden other people with their negative feelings. And they also, my best friend is a 7, so I always know there's so much more to sevens than this fun, bubbly self because actually inside they feel such dissatisfaction. They don't feel that people are going to take care of them, and so they just don't really put it out there. They have a hard time letting other people nurture them as well. Super hyper independent. And then type 8 is the challenger, and they're very strong, protective, and driven by a need for control and independence. And sometimes a cute nickname for them would be the 8 hole. So if you meet someone who says what they mean what they say, they're real, they're straight up, they do not parse words, and they don't care who they upset when they say these things, they're likely an Enneagram 8. Now, they're the type that can take a test in 2 minutes and get it figured out because it's not too hard for them to know who they are and what they think. Um, that's not the case for all the rest of the types. So, very strong individuals. And then the Enneagram 9 is called the peacemaker. They're easygoing, supportive, and they want harmony and inner peace. They desire this feeling of comfort. So, whatever comfort looks like to them is what they are seeking. And they want everyone around them to be in harmony. So, although not many of the 9 types don't really like conflict, this is the one that's probably most likely known as having a fear of conflict. However, all of the 9 types could have a fear of conflict. It's just why they have a fear of conflict that changes per the type.
So I have a million questions going through my mind, but since you're the expert, maybe you want to continue with what you feel like what your clients want to know next, or what would be most helpful for listeners.
Is there any burning question that you're like really curious about? Because it's probably what other people are curious about too.
Yeah, well, I think that what I'm hearing, and you've pointed this out several times, is that one, you may be somebody might want to try to type themselves in a certain way based on what they think they know about themselves,
Hmm.
and that may or may not be accurate. And then two, just the overlap, because I would imagine most people can identify with aspects of all of these different types.
Hmm.
And I know there's ways that when they're feeling strong and actualized, they act more towards a certain type, and when they're acting out of fear or shame, they're acting towards another type. So it's so complicated. So I don't know if you want to just take it from here and explain how
Sure.
you work with clients to sort of figure that out.
Sure, absolutely. There's so many dynamics that go into the patterns of the 9 types that I look into. So the main things that help you to figure out your type, of course, like if you listen to me say those 9 types, there's probably 2, maybe 3 that you're like, well, that sounds like me. Well, that sounds like me. So look into those first, obviously, because they're the ones that sound most like you. What you'll probably find is that they are with each other in some way. In we have the stances, and then the conflict reaction styles that really help us to kind of put them into triads and then narrow it down from 9 types to 3 and then maybe to 1. So the stances represent how we approach life and try to get our needs met. Getting our needs met means meeting our ego needs of the desires and motivations of the types. For me as a 2, how do I get my needs met of feeling loved, wanted, and needed, right? Um, and for me, for the 2s, 6s, which were the loyalists, that the more anxious, and then the Enneagram 1s, who are those perfectionists, we are in the dependent stance. So we move towards the information that we need, the person that we need, or whatever it's going to be that's going to help us get our needs met. We're a little bit more anxious as we're repressed in our head centers, so we're going to overthink things and we're going to be trying to figure everything out in our heads, but it's not really productive for us. And so that's the dependent stance. The assertive stance, the assertive or aggressive stance, are types 3, which is that successful achiever, the 7, which is the enthusiastic optimist, and then the 8, which is the challenger. And they actually move against things in order to get their desires met. So it could look like I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to make the plan. I'm going to be future forward thinking. And they don't do this in a heartless way necessarily, but it's like they've already thought of the future plans and they're very far ahead in their processing, where the rest of us are still trying to figure it out. Or when I tell you about the last one, like we're just all not quite there yet. And they feel like, come on, like we already figured it out, move on. Now they're repressed in their heart centers, which means they don't stop to take time to process their emotions. They're not heartless, but they just don't either feel comfortable doing it or they feel like it gets in the way of them getting their needs met.
This is so cool.
And
Go ahead.
then the last is the withdrawn stance types, which are types 4, which is that individualist. The five, the investigator, the one that likes to observe and have knowledge, and then the peacemaker, the Enneagram 9. And they actually move away and go internal in order for them to get their needs met. So they want to self-reflect, they want to go into their comfort zone, they want to be kind of away, and they could do that by physically removing themselves or just almost going internal when they're around others. And so kind of be aloof, if that makes sense. So a lot of things going on there, but they move internally and they are repressed in their body centers, meaning they have trouble getting into action with things. So a lot of times people are like, why aren't you doing it yet? And for the fours, it's because they don't feel like they're in the right mood. For the fives, they don't know enough yet, or they don't believe they know enough yet. And for the nines, they don't feel comfortable moving forward, and it could cause some disruption to their comfort. Or they just don't know. They haven't figured out their opinion on it yet. So first, you can kind of say like, does that dependent stance sound more like me, the assertive stance more like me, or the withdrawn stance more like me? That narrows it down from those nine types to three. And then we have the conflict reaction styles. We have the positive outlook, which you and me are in that positive outlook. You right away were like, I like to keep things optimistic and positive. So when we come against something like disappointment, loss, things don't go the way we want to, we're going to bright side that. We're going to find a solution that feels better, that makes everybody feel good. At least that's what we desire to do. So it's a two, a seven, and a nine. So a two is a dependent stance, a seven is assertive aggressive stance, and a nine is a withdrawn stance. So again, if you're withdrawn and positive, you're a nine. If that helps you to kind of see how I'm doing those little mental gymnastics. Another one would be emotional realness or emotional reactivity. These types feel their emotions and express them out. This could be in venting. This could be in emoting, like crying or big emotional gestures, things like that. The Enneagram fours are in this, the individualists, the sixes. They're more of the venting, so they feel a lot of pressure with all the anxiety, and they're going to pop that out there and vent it. The eights are also in this, but they're more of that realness where they don't even realize they're showing their anger. They're showing it's just who they are. They just live with anger and rage right underneath the surface. And so it comes across to others as emotional reactivity, but they might not feel like that feels very true to them. Could be a blind spot, if you will. So again, a dependent stance, a withdrawn stance, an assertive stance, all within there. So if you find yourself to be more emotional realness, that one could be you. And then the last one is logical thinking, the competency triad. So the people who like really only stick to the facts, keep the emotions out of it, keep positively, like we don't need to talk about positive, we don't need to talk about what could happen. We're going to talk about what did happen. We're going to break it down into facts and we're going to handle this like mature adults. That will be our Enneagram ones, the perfectionists, the threes, the successful, the achievers, and the fives, the observers. So they're going to think at things more logically. And again, there's a dependent stance, assertive stance, and withdrawn stance within those. So that can kind of help you, again, learn more about yourself. And then if you're in a relationship, like you're assertive aggressive and you're in a relationship with someone who's withdrawn, there's a lot of things you can learn about yourselves in your relationships that way.
And you said you work with husbands and wives. Who else, just generally, who else do you work with?
Yeah, I work with partners. So, if you are newly dating, if you are engaged to be married and you don't necessarily, like I'm secular in my practice. So some Enneagram circles are Christian, things like that. I'm secular. So people who maybe want some premarital counseling, but they don't necessarily want to go through like a church or something like that. I can do the typing sessions together, and then I have a couples workbook, and I go through each of the pieces of your type, kind of some of the stuff I just talked about, plus a plethora more. And so we can just do one big session, and then you have the workbook, or I can kind of work through each one and keep coming back and work on those. Um, and people who've been married for a really long time and just want to deepen their relationship and their communication. Um, it's just you can do one session and learn a ton. So that's the nice thing about it. If you don't have a lot of time and energy you want to put into it, or maybe things are going well in your relationship, but you want to see how much deeper you can take it if you're able to understand your partner more.
That's helpful. I want to come back to that process that you use with your clients here in just a second.
Sure.
What about parents and children?
So I have when I've worked with my individual clients, I do this membership. So if you're an individual client of mine, first you do a typing session and then we do a leveling session, which I can get into if you're interested. But then we go into, each session after that is just a deep dive into one of the sections of your type. So I just talked about stances. So one would be just about that. The next one's going to be about your conflict type. One's going to be about your communication styles, your childhood experiences, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how my journey goes. So members who I've worked with for a while, I feel more confident and comfortable working with them and their kids because I've heard more stories from them. I kind of get the vibes for things. You don't self-actualize, you can kind of guess which type they're going to be, maybe by middle school. So I have worked with some children of my clients to help them figure out what their type is, but generally I just say like sounds like they might be a withdrawn type and you're assertive aggressive. I also have done parenting classes where I just go through and talk about what, as this Enneagram type, likely how you're going to be parenting, like what parenting styles each of them happen to take on. What are some sticky places for you as a parent? Like where might you need to focus to make sure that you are, working as much as you can. And then I also focus on each of the 9 types as children and what is it that they specifically need to hear and focus around. So for me as a parent, every night before my child goes to bed, I I make sure I give affirmations that speak to the type I believe she might be. And if it's not her type, it doesn't hurt anything because they're all messages everyone needs to hear. So that's kind of some of the ways I've used it with parenting. And I wish I would have known the Enneagram when I was a teacher because it would have helped me be so much more compassionate and understanding with my students. I haven't had the opportunity I'm sure I could have the opportunity to go speak at a school, but I don't know that they'd pay me. So that's where it gets a little tough because I'm like, I know that they would like it, but that's where my knowing my boundaries kind of comes in, right? Because if I start doing it at one school, then it's gonna go bloop, 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 and all the other schools are gonna want me to come for free too. So,
It sounds like it would be really valuable training, though, for
oh
teachers, or at
yeah,
least to be aware of.
yeah.
And I don't know if this is something like a train the trainer that then they can go use with their students or something like that. But I would imagine this, from a fundamental point of view, would really improve that classroom, the rapport and the understanding between teachers and students, and students and students, and
Oh
students
yeah.
just within themselves.
Well, and you as a teacher understanding, ooh, I think I'm starting to get stressed and like I think I'm going there. So what do I need to do to come back to myself a little bit and showing that to your students as well? Like, wow, I didn't have that when I was teaching and it would have been phenomenal. I already was as a two compassionate, understanding, empathetic, caring and loving on all my kids, but like I wish I could have known these things about myself and the students and like, that would have just, yeah, it would have helped me not take things so personally also. And then and anyone who is a teacher and probably in a lot of other places too, but I feel like in teaching especially like teams, teacher teams, when one person thinks you should do it one way and the other one another way, we get very much so stuck in our ways. And this can kind of open up that like, okay, as true and real as my type is to me, your type is to you. So, as real as my need is to feel like I'm right here, so is yours. And how might we expand our consciousness of ourselves and the other person to create some more flexibility in this relationship so that we can have some understanding and come to a conclusion? Like maybe I need to step back here, or maybe I need to invite a voice in. Like there's a withdrawn stance type on my team, and they never get to say their opinion because they're afraid of asserting it. How can I then utilize that knowledge to make sure I bring them into the picture, things like that. So when I do team dynamics, that's a lot of what I focus on is like the need of each in a team and how they show up and things like that.
In the moment, or for listeners who are wondering whether they might be operating closer to their, I guess, more actualized, I don't know if that's the right term, or acting more out of fear, what are some feelings that can help them in the moment gauge how close they are, or to what type they're, do they just feel better when they're more actualized, and they just don't feel good when they're acting out of fear? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so for each of the 9 types, there's kind of that bridge between level 3, which is healthy, and level 4, which is average. And it's like each of the nine types kind of has their thing they slip into, right? That kind of like shifts. And then I think most people understand like when you are extremely stressed, how you show up, right? But each of the nine types also has their stress path. So it shows like directly what are your big red flags for when you're very stressed out. And so when you do a typing session with me, I highlight all of that for you directly. I think it'd be too much to go into depth and detail about that on the podcast. But some great places to look for that would be on that Enneagram Institute website. On my website, eliteenneagramcoaching.com, I do have several blog posts about this, about the levels of development for each of the types as well. If you're seeking like a 1-2 punch of like, I don't want to you're going to spend years and years working on this. You're never going to stop working on it. This is not a linear growth situation because life ebbs and flows, and so does your behavior and attitude with life. So it's not about getting healthy and staying there forever. It's about recognizing and realizing when you are shifting down and knowing you don't need to go down, keep going down, but allowing yourself to be where you are and then stepping back into the healthier self. If you're looking to do that, that's why I have a typing session and a leveling session. Within a leveling session, I don't say you're this level. I show you the core dynamics of your type starting at the highest level of development. What are the behaviors and attitudes specifically that you exhibit when you are your healthiest, highest self, and what desire and fear are those coming from? And then shifting down each of those types levels, like what does it look like? And then we highlight, oh, I'm still really stuck with this specific behavior or attitude. And so we say, instead of doing this behavior, I will do this. So an example of that for me is an Enneagram 2 at level 5, which is where a lot of people feel really stuck. It's the level of interpersonal conflict. So it's like my ego's versing your ego, and we're getting caught up in this hamster wheel from hell where we keep finding ourselves, okay? Where everyone knows what we're talking about. Um, Gossiping is a behavior of an Enneagram 2 because we want to get closer to people. We want to get the deets. We want to know what's going on. We want to be involved. We want to be in it. And so we also end up feeling a lot of shame around having all this gossiping because we feel really icky about knowing all the things. And then what do I do about this? Do I not do anything? Do I tell someone I've been lying and deceitful and it just feels gross, right? So instead of gossiping, first of all, just stop. Okay. But I'm going to still need to vent sometimes. And so, when I realize I have this need to vent about someone, I will specifically say to a friend, I'm going to vent about 3 things that are really driving me crazy about this person. All I need is for you to affirm me. That's all I'm looking for right now. I don't want to go deeper than that. I just want to say, this is driving me nuts. This is driving me nuts. This is driving me nuts. And then I feel the pressure release. So I've still been able to do a little bit of something, but it's in a healthier way. And I'm recognizing and knowing I'm doing this thing instead of just dipping into kind of gossiping. So that was a specific behavior that I was able to shift out of. And like once I stopped gossiping and I put that boundary up for myself, like I will not gossip, my life changed. And I found out that I was the one creating a lot of the problems in my life because I was going around to different people and wow, I thought they were all doing it. Turns out I was the problem. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. So, but that's how I go through each of the, if it's your session, you're going to hear about your type and your specific behaviors that you need to make a change on. And a lot of this is just small incremental changes over time that are going to give you okay, I'm going to stop gossiping. Seems like not a big deal. Change my life.
This has a ton of implications in the corporate world or in the workplace, like you
Uh-huh.
just mentioned. There are trainings for the Enneagram for the workplace, right? Do you do those as well, or do you mostly just work with individuals?
Yes. So I have my master's in education leadership, so principal's license, things like that. And most of the time I spent in schools, I was a instructional coach. So I provided professional development. So that's an area I feel really confident in. And so I've done groups size 3 all the way up to groups 125. I worked with Ancestry.com and their marketing team and did a whole big keynote with them. So I can work with all types of groups, right? Depending on the size is how in depth we can get with your own team, right? But I think that no matter what, you can glean some really interesting things about yourself and your teammates. And especially when you look at things like I'm an Enneagram 2, and the other person's an Enneagram 8, that's my stress arrow. So those are some things about myself the eight might be showing that I don't like in myself. I don't like when I behave that way. And so I'm actually projecting out things I don't like about myself while they're just being themselves, right? Like they're just being their direct selves. I'm almost like, I wish I could be that direct because I'm hiding who I truly am in order to make everyone around me love me, right?
Self-improvement is continuous, it never ends. So it sounds like this is something that can benefit anyone from wherever their starting point is currently.
Yes. And what I really like about the Enneagram is those nine levels of development because for me as a certified coach, if I, as I'm typing someone, I can kind of start to see like which of the patterns are really exhibiting. And if they seem to be showing a lot of those unhealthy patterns, it is not a judgment of mine to say like, oh, they're unhealthy. It's for me to say, you're in need of some support from a mental health specialist. You have some traumas that you really need to work on with a mental health specialist. Then once you kind of get yourself more stabilized, we can work when you're in those average levels to like decompress some of those more ego self pieces that are not, I mean, they still might be based and rooted in trauma, but like you have to kind of figure out the trauma or it's going to it will continue to keep, pulling you back down. But I am not a mental health specialist. So it's really helped me to have those clear set boundaries where I think sometimes, especially in the internet, you find people who think they can be, therapists and they're not. And I have always been very, strongly saying like these are the ways like I feel comfortable working with you, or please, we're going to work in tandem with your therapist. So if I can work with your therapist, I'd be interested in that, but I'm not going to work with you until you've gotten to a more stable place. So yes, you can definitely start Enneagram work from a lower health standpoint. I know I did. I was in therapy, and my therapist introduced me to the Enneagram, and my husband and I did therapy together, and it helped us to understand each other and ourselves deeply. But I do think that it has greater connotations working with a coach if you're kind of like, I've been in therapy, I've worked through a lot of my trauma, but I know I still have space and room to grow. So what do I do now? And I've read all the books, I've done all the things, like I know how to center myself, but there's still these patterns that are getting in the way. So I feel like that's the sweet spot.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought about asking you about that issue. So I want to be respectful of your time.
Sure.
You started to talk a little bit about your journey, and I kind of want to end with that, if that's okay. How you found Enneagram, and what motivated you to this line of this pursuit. When we started out, you mentioned that you don't typically work with a lot of men, and so I wonder if you have any thoughts for somebody who might be listening to this, a man who might be listening to this, or maybe a spouse or significant or other or whatever who thinks that this might be helpful. What are your experiences with that? Why doesn't that maybe initially connect? And then what would you want people to know about how it can be helpful?
Oh, absolutely. I I feel like it's a whole societal just norm that men shouldn't look into their emotions. Like it's like be a man and just, like I don't need to know all that. Or maybe it's fake, or maybe it's like horse, like my husband was like, I don't know what all this is kind of thing. And then he read his type structure and he was like, he threw the paper across the room because he's like, why does this know more about me than I do? Okay. And so I feel like if men want to show up in this world as their best selves, they need to humble themselves and receive the support and help that every human being needs, right? And we're not, and ever, I think men know that, and I think that it's starting to become a little bit more acceptant to look more into yourself and be more self-aware. And what I find most often is women who come to me who are really trying to do their best in a marriage where the other person is not carrying their weight, where the man is not doing his part to be self-aware. So you have this woman who is like learning all this stuff about themselves, going deep into this, and then the man is just like doing his thing and he's lockstepping. And then the woman outgrows them. And so if you don't want to be outgrown by your spouse, or you want to, continue deepening your relationship with your spouse, um, or yourself for that matter, this is just a beautiful thing to kind of like begin that journey, right? And I think men think I can do it myself. I can read into it myself. Again, you don't know what your patterns are because you're blind to them, and they wouldn't be called blind spots if they weren't blind. And so you can read into them, you can whatever, but me as a coach, I can step to the table and push back on you and get you to a place where you're not stuck anymore, right? And I think that that's what pe most people, men or women, want to get out of that stuck feeling. And so I think it's super important, and I would love to work with more men. I just, most of the time, it's like the wife's pushing them at me. I'm like, come on, guys, let's get it going, you know? So I would say, I think it's deeply important because um, if men don't understand their feelings, most likely they come out as rage and anger, or disappearing, you know, or finding their needs at the bottom of a bottle or with a cheating situation. And if they knew what their true needs were, in a more blatant, clear way, I feel like they'd be better at getting them met in a healthier way.
You explained that very clearly and I think very persuasively. Just to wrap things up, do you want to talk about what got you into this, sort of what your personal journey looked like towards
Yeah.
becoming an Enneagram coach?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick and succinct. So yes, I was a teacher, and I was a new mother. I had gone through a lot of fertility struggles, and so my husband and I were in a difficult place in our marriage, and he was starting a new business. So we had a newborn and newborn business, and I was beyond stressed in my position at work, and so bringing a lot of that home with me as well. And so I looked for therapy for myself because I was having panic attacks and just completely breaking down, right? And we eventually found a therapist together who listened to us. And now that I know the Enneagram, I'm like, I know why he brought this up because the two like biggest struggles of our types were so similar. Twos and nines are so similar. We are people pleasers. We do want to get along. We want everyone to get along and feel happy and loved. But he wants comfort, and I desire this love and this affirmation that he doesn't necessarily need. And so if I'm not getting that from him and all the things, right? I'm getting too deep in the weeds here, but so we went to therapy, we got our types, and I just kind of became obsessed. I just started reading all the books and listening to all the podcasts, and I just found it to be a great tool for myself. And I found so much development for myself that once our business took off and I was able to leave teaching, it was obvious to me once I had more understanding of my own energy and where it was going that at this point I had had a second child, and I was just like, I cannot keep giving so much of myself. And when I go to school, I am giving too much of myself. There's no way to take back more with continuing to be a good educator. And so I left and I pursued an Enneagram certification from the Enneagram University. And I just kind of used all of my knowledge and skills from teaching to start working towards getting clients and building my business from there.
This is exciting. For listeners who want to learn more, or they're thinking this is somebody I need to work with, what what do you want them to know about how to find you, about your services, all that kind of stuff? Because you're in Iowa.
Yes, I'm in Des Moines, Iowa. Yeah. I do a lot of, I mean, I work with people from all across the world. So wherever you are, I would love to work with you. Just check me out on eliteenneagramcoaching.com. Long name, I know. And then I do have some social media presence. I'm not as active on there anymore just because the content's there. So there's not much more to say on that. But and then I do those typing and leveling sessions, so you can buy them together as a package. If you buy them together as a package, it's $265, and that's 2.5 hours of coaching and a plethora of resources to get started on your own. And if you look towards like you liked it and you want to come back for more, I do have that elite membership. If you're listening and you're thinking you want to do something with your partner, I do those typing sessions as well with partners and couple sessions. And so you can email me to learn more about those. I don't have that out there, so because I need to like know I'm not going to just work with any couple because if you have a lot of dynamics happening again, I'm going to say sounds like something more for a therapist. Um, and then when it comes to team dynamics and workshops and group things like that, another great thing to email me about, which you can find my email on my website.
You've got a great website, so I'll include that in the show notes. Listeners can reach out to you that way. This has been awesome, Chelsie. My head is swimming, but I'm also like really excited and intrigued to learn more. So thank you
Awesome.
very much for spending time with me today and sharing a little bit about your huge amount of wisdom. Obviously, we just kind of hit the tip of the iceberg and you can go so much deeper, but thank you very much. Is there anything else you wanted to share?
Oh, thanks for having me. And I just hope that everybody learned a little bit of something about themselves today, can take something away. Just know that it's totally normal to be where you're at, wherever you are in your journey. And if you desire to be more curious about yourself and open up your world and your perspective, the Enneagram is a beautiful place to do that. So I hope that you look into it more and learn more, if not with me, just on your own journey.
Perfect. This was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
That's it from us today. As always, you can find more information as well as resources on our website, individualmatters.org. We hope you'll join us at the next podcast, where we'll continue to explore topics around successful living, learning and education, and child development, and share ways to help you live a more positive and fulfilling life.
The preceding information is not intended to provide or serve as medical, clinical, or educational advice. Individual Matters is not responsible for the accuracy of guest statements. All information should be validated independently. Please consult with your doctor, mental health provider, attorney, or other appropriate professionals before making any personal decisions for yourself or those in your care.